For Pasadena Media, this is a news update. Following the investigation into the fatal shooting of resident Anthony McClain, members of the City Council called for a review of policy in the Pasadena Police Department. We asked the chief to come back to us with a timeline for reviewing and adopting the recommendations that he believes should be adopted with the advice and consent of the Community Police Oversight Commission, said Mayor Victor Gordo. Pasadena's Community Oversight Commission has decided to move forward with discussions about the creation of a system to track the progress of the Pasadena Police Department's efforts to modify policy to more closely align with recent recommendations from the Office of Independent Review Group. The group's report suggests 27 procedural and policy recommendations for the Pasadena Police Department. A complete and unredacted copy of the report is available on the City of Pasadena website. For Pasadena Media, this is J.K. Stanfill.
James Farr live from Pasadena Media Studios. Get ready for more piercing and provocative. The Conversation Live starts now. And welcome to another episode of The Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. Coming up today, Pasadena Mayor Victor Gordo is in the seat. We got a lot to talk about. The mayor says the city is thriving. We want to know for who. We'll check in with the mayor just on the other side of this break. Welcome back. Thanks to our friends over at Pasadena City College for their generous support of the Conversation Live. Mayor Gordo, welcome. Thank you for being here.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You know, we got a lot to unpack in a short amount of time to get to it. But first of all, I do want to thank you for honoring your commitment to the community, making those deposits in community, and coming here on the Conversation Live. We're just here to unpack some things, learn a little bit more about how you say the city is thriving, but really the community, and what I'm hearing from the streets to the suites is we want to know who is thriving for. But before we get into that part of it, we got to look back into this Office of Independent Review regarding the Anthony McClain shooting. One council member said, and I can't use the language in terms of describing the report, but it certainly wasn't very favorable. I know when I read the report, I looked at it and thought, you as the mayor, the city council, and our department should be utterly embarrassed at the work product. When you saw that report and you read that report, all 75 pages of it, how did you process it? Like, what was your thought?
Well, the report, it's a long report, it's a long read. And I have to say that the most disappointing part of the report for me is that we hadn't implemented all of the previous recommendations. That doesn't necessarily address the report itself, but that was the most disappointing thing to see, because the purpose of going back and reviewing incidents like this and having an OIR report is for all of us to learn together, to get the facts out on the table, to ensure that we're the best in class in terms of policy and procedure. And so to learn that there were recommendations made and not implemented as recommended in the previous OIR report was very, very disappointing.
I mean, when you juxtapose the report to the Pasadena way, right? And that means many things to many different people, but specifically in the department, I mean, it's part of their ideology, it's part of the philosophy. There's, I believe, 8 tenets in that, but the one that stands out most to me is how we get the job done is just as important as getting the job done. And so when we kind of square up what we see, the shooting is to the side, right? But when we look at the investigation process following it, it's anything but substandard. I mean, the report refers to it as artificial. It refers to it in some of the most unflattering ways. So it begs to question that as a resident, as a community member, as someone visiting Pasadena, can we trust our department to investigate any crime? It's questionable whether or not they can investigate themselves. What do you say to that?
Well, I have a tremendous deal of confidence in Eugene Harris, our current police chief. And I have a tremendous deal of confidence in our police department and police officers. I believe that we have good people on the force. You know, you're always in every profession going to have to address personnel matters. But in balance, I think we have good people in place at the command staff, at the chief level. The reference made in the report to the investigation under previous leadership is very disappointing, and you know that's why we do these investigations. Now I'm going to look to our current command staff, to the city manager, and to the police chief to learn from this previous incident and put in place with a timeline how we're going to change some of those practices that need to be changed and that the chief has acknowledged need to be different.
Right. Now, I mean, he's agreed that, you know, to implement 25 of the 27 recommendations. Mm-hmm. He agreed in concept with one of the recommendations where there seemed to be some kind of tiff, if you will, is whether or not a union representative can have the duality of also being on scene for enforcement as well as being a representative. And I know you have an extensive background as a labor attorney and union attorney. Mm-hmm. I mean, doesn't that just seem like a conflict? Like, I don't think the department did very much, hindsight, right, to dispel conspiracy theories, people coming up with their own conclusions. It almost just looked like they didn't care. Like they just did minimal effort to get a report done. So how do you assure residents, community members, visitors, stakeholders, all of us, that you have a handle on this department under its new leadership, and the things that we saw in the past, we hope to just keep them in the past and that we're moving forward? What do you say about that?
Well, first off, it's the city manager and the police chief who have the handle on the department. The city council and I as mayor are part-time policy elected officials. But we certainly have a responsibility to ensure that the city manager and the chief and the command staff have a handle on the department and all of its policies and practices. The union issue, let me address that because I do have extensive experience. You know, officers appropriately are to be provided representation on site. One of the questions that I've had for the chief is, you know, you're never going to have a situation where there aren't union representatives present or members present, because most, if not all, of the officers belong to their association. It's actually an association, not a union.
Sure.
And so, you know, we just have to understand that. But in terms of having an involved officer, an officer who was involved in the incident, actually fulfill that role at that moment in time, I think we've got to revisit that, because it's not fair to the involved officer who is now called upon to be a representative for another involved officer. And I just, you know, I don't think, and it's not fair to the the other officer who is being represented. I think both deserve independent representation from an officer who wasn't directly involved in the incident. And so I think it's an issue of fairness for the officers, but also an issue of transparency for the community. And so that's one of the issues that should be addressed. It's good common sense and good practice that you have people who were involved directly have their independent representation, and that those representatives not be directly involved in the incident. I think it's common sense, I think it's sound practice, and it's something that we should look to do.
Well, Chief Harris said in a police oversight, Community Police Oversight Commission meeting as he was reporting back out, And it rang like a dog whistle for many activists, many in community, many that are paying attention to police policy. But he made reference to doing things in compliance and with guidance of the Peace Officer Bill of Rights. As a city, are you willing, as the mayor, as the council, are you guys willing to direct the city manager and the chief to do better community education? Because I don't think the general public understands. And so as I'm hearing it in the barbershop, coffee shops, and just in community, you know, some say it seems like he was blowing that whistle to the men and women of the department that, you know, do what you do. Contrast with the OIR report, like if this is the standard, do what you do, we'll protect you with pro bars. Are you willing to make that commitment to get the community better educated on, because the policy stuff, it's big, it's kind of abstract, and you know, even when you guys are talking in other spaces, there are a lot of acronyms that the general public just don't understand. What can the city do to better educate us?
You know, I think that's a good point. I don't think it at all was a dog whistle. I don't think that the chief intended to send some sort of cryptic message to his department, do what you do, or to his officers. I think he's stating the facts. You know, there are various protections for peace officers. One is statutory, the Peace Officer Bill of Rights. Then there's case law interpreting the Peace Officer Bill of Rights. And then there's constitutional law that also protects officers and public employees in general. And so we have to balance all of those sets of laws and, importantly, follow them. Because it does nobody any good if we violate an officer's rights or a member of the public's rights. And so I am committed to ensuring that we follow the law, but at the same time provide the transparency that's needed. You know, and part of it is making these reports public as soon as we can. You know, ensuring that we review incidents, learn from them, and then implement the policies and make them public so that the public understands precisely what we saw from an outside perspective compared to what they saw, and then we can have a discussion about what's going to change in terms of policy and procedure and give people confidence that it's actually going to change, that we actually are going to implement with a clear timeline.
Absolutely. Just a few more questions in this space, and then we'll transition and move on. When we look at what's happening in the region, and specifically with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, before many thought it was an idea, we now see documentation. But are you aware of any gangs in our police department?
I'm not aware of any gangs in our police department. And if there were gangs in our police department, I would be the first to bring it to the attention of the city manager and the police chief.
Are you willing to ask the city, to direct the city manager to investigate that? Because these are things, again, that the public is concerned about. There are a lot of lateral transfers coming over from the sheriff's department into our agency. So it's not an unreasonable question, right, to think that one culture permeates over into another. But are you willing to direct the city manager to look into that?
Oh, I think, you know, I can't as an individual member of the council direct anything, but I would say, you know, right here on your show that...
Well, you're on public safety. I mean, that you have...
Yes, I'm on public safety. One of 4 members.
Yes.
But absolutely, I believe all of my colleagues would say to the city manager, and I'll say it right now, that if there's any suspicion of gang activity in our police department, it's unacceptable and should be rooted out immediately.
Okay.
I believe I speak for all of my colleagues when I say that.
Do you think the department needs to be under a consent decree?
No, I don't.
Why?
I think we have a police chief that understands policing, highly regarded, has been around for a long time, and is willing to admit that we need changes in procedure and policy, and now we have to give them the opportunity to implement those with a clear timeline. I have a great deal of confidence in our city manager and our police chief. If you look at their records, of service. One, including the city manager being a former appellate court justice, and the police chief and his experience in policing, including heading up the county's police chiefs association.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're people who understand the need to have a department that serves the public well, that's top of class in policies and procedures, and that is going to take us in that direction. If we see signs of anything different, then we have to step in.
Yeah, well, I know that the chief touts transparency, he touts community, but he sure had no problem blowing past an interview here on The Conversation Live. And so that's still yet to be seen. I still welcome him, but this is not the Little Leagues anymore. Pasadena is a unique city. It's a media city, and so we appreciate you and others who make themselves available and honor their commitments. Excuse me. You seem to kind of have turned the tide with some activists, right? Some say it looks like they've become surrogates, but what have you done that's you had some strong detractors when you first got into office. I mean, those first few Mondays were kind of rattling, right? And you kind of got rattled a few times, and you clapped back, and I mean, we saw Victor, right? We saw not Mayor Gordo, and certainly not in a condescending way, but we saw you as a human being. What have you done to kind of bring some of those strongest activists who oppose some of your policies and your mayoralship? What have you done to bring them over to you?
I want to believe that I've kept my word. My word during the campaign is, we may not always agree, but I'm always going to be willing to listen. Mm-hmm. And you can be as critical as you want of me. Let's be respectful. And if you have an issue, you can always pick up the phone and call me. If I need to come out to see you at the park, in the neighborhood, at City Hall,
your home,
my own home,
yeah.
Then let's do that. Mm-hmm. I think the key is just being willing to listen. Sometimes, people just want to be heard directly, and they always want to be treated with respect, and that's what I try and live by. And so I want to believe that that's been a part of it. But it's a two-way street. I think some of the people who were critical in the past have been willing to give me that chance, and I thank them for it. I've said to people, whether you're a police officer, whether you're a gang interventionist, whether you're a community member, a member of the city council, or a member of the media, we need to work to do better, and we need to do it together because we are stronger together. Mm-hmm. And some of these issues that we're tackling are complicated and difficult, and we all have to pull in the same direction and be willing to listen to each other. Doesn't mean we always agree, mm-hmm. and sometimes we have to agree to disagree, but we got to treat one another with respect and be willing to listen to one another.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to transition because I want to be mindful of the time and the clock, and I don't want to let it run out without us getting into some things. I talked to you before, this is not a campaign stop, although you have announced that you are running for mayor again for mm-hmm. a second term. Right now, no one has indicated that they intend to mm-hmm. run, although filing isn't in some time until the fall. But some of the things that you have done in the city that have been important to you, your mental health initiative. So, Kevin, let's go ahead and roll in this next clip, and then we'll talk to the mayor on the other side of it.
For Pasadena Media, this is a news update. Pasadena City Council unanimously approves a $12 million purchase of a site for housing and mental health care. In early March, the city manager was tasked with identifying suitable properties for this collaborative venture with the County of Los Angeles, and now the resulting $12 million purchase is jointly shared. The purchase announcement was made at a special press conference on April 25th, where Mayor Victor Gordo celebrated the speed and precision of Los Angeles County's collaboration with the city of Pasadena to initiate this phase of the project. Gordo said, "Now in partnership with the county, we are going to make this investment in this part of our city on North Lake Avenue and bring forward desperately needed services to the people that we represent." Gordo continued, "This is the beginning of a journey to do the right thing at this property and for the residents of Pasadena." For Pasadena Media, this is J.K. Stanfill.
Welcome back. Mayor, why is this important to you?
It's important because I believe mental health and health, our access, are one of the most important issues that affect everyone in this community. And when I looked around to help some of my friends during the pandemic, particularly those who are found to be, that present dual diagnosis, struggling with mental health and also substance disorder, there were no services, there was no front door for county services. There's some great providers in this city,
Yes.
but they're at capacity, many of them. I believe there are 19 of them, 16 of them are at complete capacity, and it takes, sometimes weeks to get in there. When someone's in crisis, they need a place to go, particularly our youth. One out of every 5 Americans pre-COVID was struggling with mental health issues already. 51 million people. And when I look at our community, I see, we just talked about policing. I see the issue of mental health present in so many issues like gang activity, violence. It's many times driven by mental health, and sometimes a combination of mental health and substance abuse.
How long will it take to get this rolled out? We're going to go through a rapid round real quick.
I'm hopeful that we can put shovels in the ground within the next year, year and a half. We're partnering with the county. The county's going to provide the services at Lake and Villa. I'm hopeful that we'll all pull together and make this happen for the benefit of our community. We need those services, and it's amazing that a city like Pasadena doesn't have that front door to bring someone in crisis. Right now it's the emergency room, and that's unacceptable. And so I'm committed to doing all that I can to bring it to fruition as soon as possible.
Let's talk about something I know was very personal to you, and that's something you really wanted to get done. And again, when we interrogate that Pasadena is thriving, as you said, in the State of the City message back in February, and I raised the question for who, right? Mm-hmm. So you wanted to, you're bringing forward a vocational training career pathway for mm-hmm. young people. Kevin, let's go ahead and roll in this next video, and then we'll get the mayor's reaction on the other side.
For Pasadena Media, this is a news update. On Monday, March 20th, the City Council voted unanimously to formalize its partnership with the Pasadena Unified School District, Pasadena City College, and other institutions to expand career technical education in Pasadena. Mayor Victor Gordo said, "This is about breaking cycles of poverty and creating opportunities for everyone and having employment training that leads to employment that gives them the opportunity to be successful and contributing members of our community." The formalized partnership with the city will allow the pursuit of grants, not only to identify a training site and expand program planning, but also to help ensure the success for this education and employment initiative. For Pasadena Media, this is J.K. Stanfill.
And welcome back. The mayor was gracious enough to extend his time, and so for those of you who have been watching on the Arroyo channel, thank you for coming over to our social platforms. We want to talk a little bit more to the mayor. Got a few more questions that we want to get to that are hot button questions. Cannabis is in the city. It's been here for the last 2 years. Social equity has been something that's been talked about for quite some time. The two questions is what mechanisms, or will we ever see a social equity program? The second question is, are the tax revenues from the cannabis sales here in the city performing as anticipated by the city?
I think, one, we should revisit social equity, and this is why. The goal of legalizing cannabis was to take the street sales away. Because that also attracts crime. And I don't think we've completely achieved that goal. And so we should revisit it for social equity purposes, but also in order to revisit if we can achieve the goal that we actually set to achieve, which was get rid of the street sales.
Local and minority hiring. How are we going to fix this? We're talking about Pasadena being better or thriving. Who's in charge of that? Who can help with the local hiring initiatives? And I'm talking about from construction to the cannabis industry to all the sectors.
That's a big part of the job training program. Because one of the things that the trades have said to us is when we go in to hire, you don't have the trained workforce. So shame on us if we don't have this job and training opportunity when we break ground, for example, at Pasadena's largest public works project over at the 710 freeway. We've got to start preparing the workforce today to be ready to put the first shovel in the ground at the 710 corridor. That's, I believe, the way to change the local hire initiative. To train, give people in our community the opportunity to learn these trades, to be trained, to do the work. I believe that we can do much better than we're doing right now, and that's why we're doing that jobs program.
710 was my next question. 710 stub. I read somewhere, forgive me, I don't have that note in front of me, but it said it would be at least 10 years before that we actually break ground on that. So most of the people who were displaced in and around the Parsons area, they're either in their 80s or 90s by now. And so we're talking about another 10 years for there to be some restoration for the loss of their property. How can we expedite that? How are we going to make these families and their heirs whole if it's another 10 years from now before we even can get to breaking ground? What will the city do?
Well, I'm not convinced that it should take 10 years or will take 10 years. I think the state of California, remember that the handing over of the land, the reclaiming of the land from the state to Pasadena was solely for transportation purposes. The state expects us to come back and report to them very soon on what our plan is and what the progress is for the plan to do something with the land and the feasibility of getting it done. And so we have a shorter timeline than 10 years. And so as long as I'm mayor, I expect to keep us to that timeline and ask the council to do the same, and the city manager.
But how are we going to make these families whole? That's the question. How do we restore that? That was stolen or theft, right? It was obviously through eminent domain, but how it plays out into people's actual lives is they feel like their property was stolen. How does the city make that right?
Well, I think, one, we have to ensure that we're looking at all of the facts. I'm confident that there will be an opportunity to have that discussion once we have, I don't know whether to call him a historian or not him or her, the consultant who's going to help both the commission that we've appointed, the 710, I forget what they're calling themselves now. They changed their name, but the 710 Commission and the City Council will have to look at that issue. And frankly, the state of California is going to expect us to do the same thing. We're going to have a clear plan. It's going to have to be timely. It's going to have to be achievable, and it's going to have restorative justice as well as other issues. Housing, how we pay for the infrastructure. Imagine the infrastructure alone that needs to go in there to support these 50 or so acres.
Okay. Last thing, and we'll get out of here. Thank you for your time, Mayor. Equity in media. I don't know if you're aware, but the city selectively sends out information to selective media outlets. The city selectively advertises in certain outlets. That draws people to a conclusion that some outlets are state-sponsored, so to speak, in that pejorative sense, or that your thumb is actually on the keyboard of what they're reporting. How do you ensure equity for all media in this city and correct the lack of dissemination? And I'm speaking specifically about black media. When the police department, and the city withhold information, they disallow us to communicate with our audience. Certainly isn't fair, but it also seems very intentional. Can you direct or instruct the city manager to correct those things so that all of Pasadena is able to learn what's going on?
You know, I think the media has a very important role to play, not just in the dissemination of information, but in educating the public as to what's going on, transparency. I'm a big believer in the First Amendment and the right of the press to have access to information and then publish the information. And so if information is not being disseminated equally, that's certainly something that I can inquire about. It should be. There's no reason it shouldn't be. I'm not aware that it's withheld from anyone.
I'm telling you it is. I'm telling you it is. And whether they like it or not, that's not really what we're talking about here. It's a matter of servicing an audience who trust us, right? And we don't always get it right. Police don't always get it right. You don't always get it right.
Yeah.
But we endeavor to correct it, right? And those are the things that we will do. At least I know that I will do. So that's something that I want to certainly make sure that we're able to revisit in the near future.
Well, I very much look at the media and access into a free media as one of the pillars of our society. You know, it keeps open government at the forefront as an issue. You know, when I don't get it right, or my colleagues don't get it right, or the city manager or the police chief don't get it right, the public should know about that. You know, and we should always strive to ensure that all media have the same information. And when we get it right, too, the public should know about that.
Absolutely. Well, you know, I appreciate you stopping by. You know, we're doing something different this year on this season on Conversation Live. We're not calling anyone out. We're calling you in. Chief Harris, there's a seat here for you. You're welcome to have several of them. Till we have another opportunity to speak with you again. Thank you, Mayor Gordo, for being here. Agape.
Thank you.